Hello Year 3 and welcome back to our YouTube channel and welcome back to our next science lesson where we're going to continue our topic on the nappy challenge. So let me start our screen share so you can work along the lesson with myself. So today we're going to focus on devising scientific questions about nappies. And we're going to learn all about what a scientific question is, how to come up with good scientific questions before coming up with some of our own. But before we delve into that, let's answer some of those recap questions that you can see on the board. First one, what is a nappy made from? I believe you did that last time with Mr. English. Second one, a recap on our light unit earlier in the year. Can light travel round corners? What do you think? And third question, how can we group rocks? And there might be lots of different ways that we can group rocks. And if you remember back again in our last unit, we did group rocks into different ways. As always, pause the video here, have a go at those recap questions, and I'll go through the answers in just a moment's time. So let's have a look at those questions together. What is a nappy made from? Now, there's lots of different materials to a nappy. There are some absorbent crystals within the bottom of the nappy to absorb liquids. There is elastic around the waist of the nappy, so it fits around a baby's or a person's waist. There is cotton throughout the nappy to make it soft. And there might be some other materials too that perhaps you came up with. If you had any others, perhaps send them in to the Year 3 email accounts and we can have a look at any you might have had. Next question, can light travel round corners? As we learned in our light topic, light travels just in straight lines, so it cannot curve round a corner. The only way you might be able to get light to travel around a corner is if you have a mirror placed on that corner so it reflects off that mirror. But apart from that, no, it cannot. And last question, how can we group rocks? Now, we did this in lots and lots of ways in our last unit on rocks, fossils and soils. We grouped them very simply based on their colour. We grouped them on their hardness. You might remember doing that scratch test where we scratch the rocks against each other to see which one is hardest. We can group them on how friable they are, and that means how crumbly they might be. And we can also group them on things like this streaks. A streak is like when it has a colour running through it. Some rocks have that, some don't. So there's some of the ways. Again, you might have come up with some different ways that you can group rocks too. Now, as always, we focus on a different scientific skill each lesson. And they all come from the same wheel that you can see here. Today, because we're devising scientific questions, it links to this part of the wheel here, asking relevant questions. And that's what we're going to be doing today. As a little warm-up, I've got a question for you. What would happen in the world if there was no plastic? What would the world be like? How would it be the same, maybe? And how would it be different? Have a think about that. Maybe jot down some ideas. What do you think? To share one with you, I think it would be a very strange place to live because we wouldn't have anything like plastic bottles that we could use. Everything would have to be made of glass or metal or an alternative material. So it would be very strange because so many of the things around us today are made of plastic. Even my rucksack down here has plastic in it. So it would be very different in my opinion. Maybe you had a similar answer, maybe you had a different one. Moving on. As I said, today we're going to be devising scientific questions about nappies, and we will use some of these for potentially some investigations later in our units, although we'll have to think a bit creatively about how we might do them at home. Now, to test your knowledge of scientific questions, I've got some questions on the board. Some of these are scientific, some of these aren't very scientific. Maybe you can group them into which ones are scientific questions and which ones are non-scientific questions. Let's have a look at them together. How much liquid will a nappy absorb? I wonder if that's a scientific question or a non-scientific question. Where is my cat? What time is it? What happens when light hits a mirror? Which elastic band stretches the most? And which rocks are permeable? Now I'm going to give you a bit of a clue. Scientific questions are questions that we can answer usually by using the rest of these scientific skills. So maybe by setting up a fair test. Maybe by carefully observing and accurately measuring. Maybe by looking for patterns. And they also contain scientific language. I can give you one example. Permeable might be an example of a piece of scientific vocabulary that relates to rocks. See if you can sort those into 2 columns, and we'll go through them in just a moment's time. Let's look at those questions together. So the scientific questions from all of those were: how much liquid will a nappy absorb? What happens when light hits a mirror? Which elastic band stretches the most? And which rocks are permeable? The non-scientific questions there were: what time is it? And where is my cat? And again, scientific questions can be answered using our working scientifically skills, like I suggested, and they also have scientific vocabulary like permeable, liquid, light, those sorts of words. Now, as a mini challenge, I want you to come up with your own scientific questions about nappies using the following question stems: what, where, how, when, why, what if? Can you have a go at creating some scientific questions there? And remember, we need to use scientific vocabulary. So think about the kind of words you would or maybe wouldn't use as you come up with those questions. Again, pause the video there, have a go at coming up with those questions using at least some of those question stems, and then we'll come back together in a moment. Now, we're going to build on that mini challenge for your main challenge today. You've come up with some questions, hopefully some very scientific questions, and for each question now, I want you to explain how you would answer it. Now, I've given you an example here. How much water does a nappy absorb? I know that's a scientific question because I can test it. I can make careful and accurate measurements and observations to test that. And I've also used scientific language. I've used that word absorb. Now, I would solve this, or I would test this, by taking one nappy and adding 5 milliliters of water at a time. I might use a small measuring cup or small measuring container to make sure I have the same amount of water each time. I would keep adding a little bit of water each time onto that nappy until the water stops soaking into that nappy. And at that time, I know however much water I've added previously, that's how much water that nappy can absorb. And that's how I'd solve it using science. Have a go at some of your own. Please send them into the Year 3 email accounts. I would love to see some of your ways that you're going to solve those questions. Thanks for listening. I can't wait to see some of your learning, and see you next time. Bye now.